There is a conversation that King Charles has reportedly had with his heir, or tried to have, that William has not publicly acknowledged, not formally responded to, and that the palace has never confirmed. But, according to multiple sources close to the royal family, the substance of it is clear enough. Charles has asked William to promise that Camilla will be protected when he is gone. Not tolerated, not managed from a polite distance. Protected, given a place. Treated with the respect her title carries and the dignity her decades of service to the crown have, in Charles's view, earned. William has not given that promise, at least not in any form that has satisfied the people asking for it on Camilla's behalf. And everything that has happened between Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace in the summer of 2026, the Cloak and Dagger Highgrove meeting, the curtsy allegation, the Buckingham Palace room offer, the secret communications summit with Harry's team, flows, in one way or another, from the space between what Charles has asked and what William has not confirmed. Before we go deeper into what this promise involves, what it would require William to do, and why royal experts are warning it may be the most consequential private negotiation of the entire succession, make sure you subscribe, because the full picture of this story has not been assembled in one place before now. Begin with what Charles has reportedly asked. According to a source shared with Radar Online, Charles wants William to ensure Camilla remains respected after he ascends to the throne. That is the foundational request. Simple in language, vast in implication. An insider described Charles as feeling that William still harbors resentment toward Camilla and that the prince's approach remains diplomatic in public while significantly more revealing in private. The source added, "Most people believe he's still harboring a lot of resentment toward her. The way Camilla betrayed their mother has not been forgotten by either of Diana's children. The context behind that resentment requires no elaboration for anyone who has followed this family. Diana died in 1997. William was 15 years old. Camilla Parker Bowles had been part of the background of his parents' collapse for years before that. The woman the British public blamed, often in the harshest possible terms, for the destruction of a marriage that William was too young to have understood, but old enough to have felt the consequences of. The public rehabilitation of Camilla, step by careful step, title by title, appearance by appearance, culminating in her designation as Queen at the coronation of May 2023, was Charles's project. William watched it. He managed it with the diplomatic composure that has always defined his public approach to things he finds difficult. But managing it and accepting it are not the same thing, and the people inside the palace who know William best have consistently told reporters that the resentment is still there, simply better concealed than his brother's. Harry published his resentment in a memoir. William carries his in a face that multiple commentators have now described as unreadable whenever he is in the same room as Camilla. Royal broadcaster Ian Pelham Turner said it directly. William is past the point of even trying to hide his distaste for Camilla. You can see it written all over his face whenever they're in the same room. That face, and what it communicates about the future, is what Charles is reportedly trying to address through his private request. He wants a commitment that goes beyond diplomatic endurance. He wants William to actively ensure that Camilla has a place, a role, a continued presence within the institution that her husband built around her across 20 years of sustained effort, and he is apparently not satisfied that the commitment exists. What happens to Camilla when Charles is gone is not merely a sentimental question. It is a constitutional and institutional one with specific, documented answers, and none of those answers guarantee her the position she currently holds. When Charles dies, Camilla becomes what is known in royal precedent as a Queen Dowager. That title has existed in English law for centuries and simply means the widow of a king, distinguishing her from whoever is the reigning monarch's own consort, which in William's case would be Catherine. Camilla would not be styled Queen Mother. That designation applies only when the former consort is also the biological mother of the reigning monarch. William is the son of Charles and of Diana. Camilla is his stepmother. The Queen Mother title, however natural it might feel in casual usage, given how closely it resembles Camilla's actual position, does not legally fit. Queen Dowager is the correct designation. The last time a British royal family member used it was nearly 200 years ago, after the death of King William IV in 1837, when his widow, Queen Adelaide, lived for another 12 years under that title, as Victoria began her reign. The precedent is ancient, and the practical implications of it for Camilla's daily life are significant in ways that most coverage of this story has not examined carefully. As Queen Dowager, Camilla would have no constitutional role. She would carry no formal authority within the monarchy. Her place of residence would depend on arrangements made by the new king, arrangements William would control. Clarence House, which Charles and Camilla currently use as their primary London residence, would not automatically remain hers. The charities she patronizes, the engagements she attends, the staff who support her, the security arrangements that surround her, all of it would depend on the goodwill and the practical decisions of the man who currently cannot enter a room with her without his feelings being visible on his face. That is what Charles is trying to protect against. Not the formal title question. Camilla will be Queen Dowager regardless of anything William says or does. But the substance behind the title, whether she is treated as a respected senior royal with a genuine role, like the late Queen Mother who remained an active and beloved public figure for 50 years after George VI's death, or whether she is gradually sidelined into an honorary position with diminishing practical support. The signal Charles received that the latter was possible was not theoretical. It was specific and documented. When William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall in 2022, among the arrangements he reviewed was the employment of Annabel Elliot, Camilla's younger sister, as the duchy's chief interior designer. Elliot had been on the royal payroll since 2005, the year Charles married Camilla, and had earned several £100,000 over nearly 2 decades working on properties across Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland. William removed her from the payroll quietly, through the mechanism of not renewing her contract. Palace sources insisted there was no bad blood. Her work was described as complete, but the message received inside Charles's circle was precise and uncomfortable. William is already showing a ruthless streak. It's no wonder Charles worries he's unlikely to find a place for Camilla. That was not a remark about interior design. It was a remark about what the future looks like for the people Charles has spent his reign protecting. And it arrived while he is managing cancer, while he is doing the arithmetic of a man who cannot assume unlimited time and who knows that the assurances he gives Camilla now are only as strong as the heir's willingness to honor them later. Charles reportedly gave her a private assurance. According to sources, he has told Camilla she will continue to have a place within the royal household after his death. Whether that assurance has been formalized into any kind of arrangement that would bind William constitutionally is not publicly known. What is clear from the reporting is that the assurance rests on Charles's belief that he can still influence William's disposition while he is alive, and this summer has produced evidence, from multiple directions, that William's disposition toward Camilla has not improved. The tiara incident is the most recent addition to that evidence. At the wedding of Peter Phillips and NHS nurse Harriet Sperling in June 2026, a dispute emerged between William and Camilla over whether Harriet should have been permitted to borrow a tiara from the royal collection. According to Closer magazine's sources, Camilla's team blocked the request on protocol grounds, arguing that a non-royal should not be dipping into the family vault. William was reportedly furious. An insider said he wanted his cousin and close friend to at least have the option of a family piece, and that Camilla's flat refusal was an example of her exercising authority in ways he neither endorsed nor respected. The dispute did not stop there. According to the same reporting, Camilla responded by making the most serious allegation she has reportedly leveled against William to date. She is said to have accused him privately of acting as though he already has the final say, of treating Charles's reign as merely a formality that needs to be endured before he takes over. She reportedly told people around her that William was refusing to take orders, not only from her but increasingly from his father. She pressed Charles to intervene, describing William as too eager to call the shots before his time. That allegation, a queen accusing the heir apparent of treating the current king's reign as a formality, is extraordinary. It has not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace. Sources close to William reject the characterization. According to those same reports, William believes he has not only the right, but the responsibility to lead and to correct mistakes where he sees them as heir to the throne. In his reading, he is not treating his father's reign as a formality. He is performing the function of a future king who understands what the monarchy needs and is prepared to say so, even when the current monarch's choices are not what he would make. But Camilla's accusation landed with force inside the palace, and it fed directly into a separate report that had been building since the spring. In Touch magazine reported, cited by IB Times UK, that William had been promised a degree of power during his father's illness, that as Charles managed his cancer treatment, responsibilities would be ceded to the Prince of Wales as an acknowledgement of both William's readiness and Charles's reduced capacity. According to the same source, what actually happened was different. Was promised that some power would be ceded to him, the source said, but his father is clearly on this mission to stamp his authority on the monarchy, not just globally, but domestically as well. William was described as stomping his feet over what he sees as a bait and switch. The U.S. state visit in April 2026 was cited as a specific example. Charles and Camilla traveled to Washington and New York to meet President Trump, a trip that generated significant international coverage and demonstrated that Charles could still command attention on the world stage at the highest level. William was not part of it. The trip belonged to Charles and Camilla as sovereign and queen, and the message it sent, according to sources close to the Prince of Wales, was that the power William had been led to expect would gradually shift to him was not shifting, that Charles was reasserting his authority at exactly the moment William had been preparing to exercise more of his own. Set that bait-and-switch allegation alongside Camilla's formality accusation, and the picture of this palace in the summer of 2026 becomes sharper and more uncomfortable than most reporting has assembled in one place. William believes he was promised more power and did not receive it. Camilla believes William is acting as if the power has already arrived. Charles is managing both of them while also managing cancer and a private request to Harry that neither of them endorsed. And somewhere in the middle of all of it is a promise about Camilla's future that Charles has made and that William has not confirmed. What that promise would actually require of William goes beyond sentiment. It would require him to decide, when the time comes, that Camilla retains a working role within the institution rather than being given an honorary title and a reduced practical presence. It would require him to ensure that Clarence House remains available to her, or that an equivalent residence is provided. It would require him to support her continued patronage of the charities she has built relationships with over decades, particularly her long-standing work on literacy and her advocacy for survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence, areas where she has genuine credibility and institutional relationships. It would require him to not do to Camilla what he did to Annabel Elliot, which is to exercise his authority through bureaucratic mechanisms that produce the practical equivalent of exclusion without the dramatic visibility of a formal break. Whether William would honor those requirements is the private question Charles cannot get a clean answer to. And it is the question that, according to Ian Pelham Turner's recent commentary, is driving Charles's most consequential decisions of this summer. Pelham Turner's claim was specific. Camilla has been urging Charles not to listen to William over what to do about Harry. The Queen is reportedly arguing that Charles should follow his own instincts rather than defer to the heir whose attitude toward her is well documented and whose future intentions toward her position remain, in Camilla's own reported characterization, uncertain at best. If that reported influence is accurate, it places Camilla not merely as the subject of Charles's private promise, but as an active participant in the palace's current power dynamics, someone who is lobbying for a direction that reduces William's effective authority in the present as a way of shaping the terms of her own future. In this reading, Camilla's support for Harry's return is not primarily about Harry. It is about William. A king who is rebuilding a relationship with his younger son is a king whose emotional dependency on his older son is reduced. And a king who is less dependent on William is a king whose choices about Camilla's future are less susceptible to the unspoken pressure of an heir who has already demonstrated, through the Annabel Elliot decision and through the face he wears in Camilla's presence, where his loyalties do not lie. The curtsy allegation, reported by Pelham Turner to the Daily Express, is the most recent evidence of how the dynamic has surfaced publicly. At a recent royal engagement, William and Catherine allegedly walked past Camilla without curtsying or bowing. Charles reportedly saw it, and in Pelham Turner's framing, his response was the cloak and dagger Highgrove reunion, a king defending his wife as publicly and consequentially as his remaining authority allows, against the heir who just walked past her in a corridor without acknowledgement. That framing transforms the Highgrove meeting from a family reunion into an institutional declaration. Charles was not merely a grandfather wanting to see his grandchildren, though that motivation was real. He was a husband communicating to everyone inside the palace who could interpret the message, and to Camilla specifically, that her position is not something he will allow to be diminished while he remains king, not through curtsy omissions, not through bureaucratic payroll decisions, not through the accumulated weight of an heir's barely concealed resentment. Richard Fitzwilliams warned that the most disastrous outcome for the monarchy would be a falling out between Charles and William. The falling out Fitzwilliams was warning about is not yet visible on the surface. Both men continue to perform the civic functions of their roles. Charles appears at engagements. William makes carefully worded public statements about the causes he supports. The institutional machinery grinds on with apparent smoothness. But beneath that smoothness, according to sources across multiple credible outlets, two things are happening simultaneously that cannot both be true for long. Charles is spending the remaining time of his reign establishing facts, reopening Harry's access, demonstrating Camilla's security, asserting his authority against what he reads as his heir's encroachment, in the belief that what he builds now will endure after him. And William is watching Charles do this, while also watching the promise about Camilla grow more significant with every development, knowing that what he says or does not say about it will define not just his relationship with a stepmother he resents, but the entire shape of how he is understood as a king when the institution finally belongs to him. The promise has not been given. Charles is using the tools still available to him: the Highgrove door, the Buckingham Palace room, the loyalty of a king to his wife, to make it more likely. William is holding his position. The palace is caught between them. And Camilla, who has spent more than 3 decades navigating the distance between who she is and what the public was prepared to accept her as, is watching a 77-year-old man with cancer do everything he still can to make sure that when he is no longer there to protect her, the institution he leaves behind will not close around her. Whether it will is the question that Charles cannot answer. It is the question that everything happening this summer, every cloak and dagger meeting, every curtsy withheld, every room at Buckingham Palace offered and contested, is really about. The promise is the story. Everything else is the palace trying to force an answer without being able to ask the question directly. To understand the stakes of Charles's private promise in full, consider what Camilla's position could look like under a king who honors it versus under a king who does not. The precedent of the Queen Mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, widow of George VI, is the one Charles is almost certainly drawing on when he pictures what he wants for Camilla. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon outlived her husband by 50 years. She remained an active, beloved, and genuinely powerful public figure throughout Elizabeth II's reign. She attended engagements. She maintained her charities and patronages. She was a visible and respected presence at the major ceremonies that defined the monarchy decade by decade. She was given Clarence House as her primary London residence. She was given Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park as her country home. She was supported by a full household, including personal staff, security, and the institutional infrastructure that makes sustained public engagement possible. She was, in short, the model of what a dowager queen can be when the reigning monarch actively chooses to support that role. And she was the Queen Mother, the biological mother of the reigning queen, which means her position carried an emotional legitimacy that Camilla's equivalent role would not automatically inherit. Camilla is William's stepmother. That distinction is not merely technical. It changes the emotional weight of every decision William would make about her future, and it removes the automatic political cost of diminishing her presence. A king who sidelines his own mother would face a public reaction of visceral force. A king who gradually reduces his stepmother's institutional footprint through quiet budget decisions, through reduced security allocations, through not renewing the contracts of people who work on her behalf, would face a much more manageable public conversation if the decisions were structured carefully enough to avoid a visible break. William knows this, Camilla knows this, and Charles, who has spent his entire life inside an institution where the difference between formal status and practical influence is navigated through exactly these kinds of administrative and budgetary mechanisms, knows it most clearly of all. This is why the Annabel Elliot decision registered inside the palace the way it did. It was not the size of the decision, it was the category. William exercised a new authority over a domain he had just inherited, and one of the first visible uses of that authority was a decision that removed a Camilla family member from a position Charles had created. No confrontation, no announcement, no drama. Just a line in an annual accounts document where a name had previously appeared and now did not. The bureaucratic mechanics of a message being sent without a word being spoken. If that is how William exercises authority when Charles is still alive and still king, the question Charles is apparently unable to stop asking is what those mechanics will produce when there is no living king to appeal to. The bait-and-switch allegation adds a specific dimension to this that the palace has never formally addressed. When Charles was at his most ill, when his treatment schedule required him to step back from public duties in the early months of 2024, responsibilities were reportedly redistributed toward William. Sources at the time suggested this was an acknowledgement of both William's readiness and Charles's reduced capacity. William took on more. He was visibly in command of more. The language used in the coverage of that period frequently described it as a preview of the reign to come. Then Charles recovered enough to reassert himself. The United States state visit in April 2026. Charles and Camilla in Washington and New York, meeting Trump, commanding international attention at the very highest diplomatic level, was read by sources close to William as a reclaiming of ground. The king who had appeared to be stepping back was back, and the power that William had been led to expect would gradually transfer to him had been retrieved. According to an in-touch source cited by IB Times UK, William was promised that some power would be ceded to him. Instead, his father was on what the source called a mission to stamp his authority on the monarchy. William was described as feeling bait and switched. Whether that characterization is fair to Charles is a question the palace will never answer publicly. A king managing cancer, handling a complex succession, trying to balance his own sustained authority against the heir's growing institutional weight, while also trying to protect his wife and repair his relationship with his estranged younger son. That king is doing more than one thing at once, and the tension between those things does not resolve into a single coherent intention. Charles is not running a strategy against William, but the cumulative effect of his choices, the state visit, the Highgrove meeting, the Buckingham Palace offer, the private promise about Camilla, the communications summit, conducted without Kensington Palace's involvement, looks, from William's vantage point, like a set of decisions designed to reduce the heir's effective authority, while Charles is still in a position to do so. Catherine's position in all of this has been less examined than it deserves. She is not a background figure in this conflict. She is, according to multiple reports, an active presence in William's position, someone who shares his assessments, and whose own relationship with Camilla is, by multiple accounts, as fraught as her husband's. One source told an American outlet that Camilla treats Catherine in a way that multiple insiders have described as dismissive, looking down her nose, effectively treating the future queen as a second-class commoner. The same source described Camilla as putting Kate in her place at every opportunity. Whether those specific characterizations are accurate is impossible to verify from outside. What is verifiable is that the relationship between the Waleses and Camilla has been described in consistently difficult terms across years of reporting from multiple independent sources. That relationship is part of what Charles's private promise is really asking William to manage. He is not only asking his son to give Camilla a roof and a household budget. He is asking him to manage the relationship between his wife and his stepmother in a way that reflects well on the institution, to ensure that the succession is not remembered as the moment one woman was elevated and another was quietly diminished. That is a much larger ask than a title or a residence. It is an ask about emotional posture, about the tone set in private rooms, about whether Camilla feels that the institution she has spent 20 years serving still values her once the man who brought her into it is no longer there. William has not confirmed he can or will deliver that, and Charles, according to every piece of reporting from this summer, is spending his remaining authority trying to create conditions that make William's failure to deliver it harder and more costly than it would otherwise be. Open the doors to Harry, and Camilla has a visible demonstration that Charles's loyalty to the people he loves still operates, regardless of the heir's preferences. Offer Buckingham Palace, and Camilla knows that the king's home was available to his younger son when it mattered, which makes it harder for his stepmother to believe she will be left entirely unprotected. Keep asserting authority through the state visit and the U.S. trip, and the Highland Games, and the record approval rating, and Camilla has evidence that the king she married still commands the room, that the institution has not quietly transferred to William ahead of schedule. All of it, in this reading, is Charles building the case for a promise that has not yet been given. And William is watching the case being built, absorbing each piece of it with the controlled fury that multiple sources describe as genuine and sustained, and calculating what it means for the reign he is being asked to accept on terms he did not negotiate and has not endorsed. There is a particular cruelty to the position this creates for William, and it deserves to be named clearly. He loved his mother. He lost her at 15, in circumstances that involved this woman, in ways that no amount of rehabilitation or public image management can fully erase from his private memory. He has spent his adult life managing that loss with extraordinary public discipline, giving Camilla the dignity her position requires, while never, by any credible account, extending her the warmth that would make the management unnecessary. And now the father he loves, who he is preparing to succeed, who he has spent years positioning himself to protect and ultimately replace, is asking him to make a promise about the future of a woman whose past remains, for William, the most personal and least resolvable wound of his entire life. That is not a palace politics problem. That is a human one. and it is the human problem at the center of every political, institutional, and constitutional question this summer has raised. Charles cannot resolve it by asking William to promise. He can only create the conditions that make it harder not to. He can demonstrate, through his choices, what he values. He can use the authority he has left to signal, as clearly as that authority allows, that his wife matters to him in ways that will not be quietly erased the moment the doors become William's to close. September will tell part of the next chapter. Whether Harry arrives at Buckingham Palace and whether Charles's renewed invitation achieves what the first one failed to, those details will add another brick to the foundation Charles is building. The 2027 Invictus Games will tell another part, if Charles stands beside Harry in Birmingham in front of the world. The question of Camilla's residence, her household, her patronages, and her practical daily life after Charles, those questions belong to a timeline that has not yet arrived, and that Charles is working to influence while he still can. The private promise changes William's future not because it is binding on him, but because of what refusing it costs and what honoring it requires. If he refuses, if Camilla finds herself gradually diminished under his reign, her family removed from payrolls, and her role reduced to an honorary title with limited practical support, he will have answered the question of who he is as king in the most personal terms available. If he honors it, if he finds a way to give Camilla the place his father asked for, in spite of everything that place represents, he will have demonstrated a capacity for separating personal grief from institutional responsibility, that is, in some ways, the defining test of the kind of king he intends to be. Charles cannot make William pass that test. He can only make certain that everyone inside the palace, and eventually everyone outside it, knows the test exists. The promise is on the table. The man being asked for it has not answered, and the king who put it there is spending the summer of 2026 making sure the question is impossible to ignore. The specific mechanisms through which William's answer to Charles's private promise will eventually become visible are worth examining in detail, because they are more numerous and more consequential than most coverage of this story has recognized. The most immediate is residence. Clarence House, where Charles and Camilla currently live as their primary London base, is a crown property. It does not belong to Charles personally and does not automatically pass to Camilla upon his death. It is a residence allocated by the state to senior members of the royal family, and its allocation after Charles is a decision that will sit with William. Clarence House is not without precedent for widowed consorts. The late Queen Mother used it for decades following George VI's death. But the Queen Mother was Catherine's predecessor in the role of future Queen Consort, not a stepmother whose presence in that house a future king might find institutionally inconvenient. Whether Camilla remains at Clarence House or is moved to Ray Mill House, her private country home in Wiltshire, or to some other arrangement, is a decision that has not been announced and that the palace will not address publicly while Charles is still alive. But it is a decision that belongs to William's reign, and it will be one of the first visible indications of whether Charles's private promise was heard. The second mechanism is security. Royal protection is expensive, operationally complex, and allocated by the palace through arrangements that the reigning monarch ultimately controls. The Sussex security dispute, which ran through multiple court cases and became one of the defining legal battles of Harry and Meghan's post-royal years, demonstrated how consequential and how contested these allocations can become. Camilla, as Queen Dowager, would require a level of security commensurate with her status and her public profile. What that level is, who pays for it, and how it is structured are questions that William's team would determine. A generous allocation signals respect and continued institutional engagement. A reduced allocation signals something else, that the woman in question is being managed toward a quieter, less publicly active version of her role. The third mechanism is institutional support. The staff, the communications team, the private secretaries, the organizational infrastructure that makes royal public life possible. Camilla currently commands the resources of a working queen. After Charles, she would command the resources of a Queen Dowager, and those resources would be whatever William's palace decided to allocate. The charities she has championed, literacy programs, domestic abuse support organizations, rape crisis centers where she has spent 20 years building credibility and relationships, depend on her continued active engagement. That engagement depends on institutional support. The support depends on the king. These are not abstract questions. They are the practical content of Charles's private promise. When he reportedly asked William to ensure Camilla remains respected, he was asking about all of these things simultaneously: the roof, the security, the staff, the role, the dignity of continued public purpose. And he was asking a man who removed Camilla's sister from his payroll the first time he had the authority to do so. The historical parallel of Queen Adelaide, the last royal widow to formally hold the Queen Dowager title, offers a cautionary note that is more relevant than its 19th century dating might suggest. Adelaide outlived her husband William IV by 12 years, during the entirety of Queen Victoria's early reign. Victoria and Adelaide did not have a warm relationship. The new queen was barely 18 when her uncle died. Adelaide navigated her widowhood with grace and without controversy, maintaining a reduced but genuinely respected presence in public life. She attended state occasions. She supported her charities. She was given a residence and appropriate institutional support. The transition worked because both parties handled it with a degree of care that prevented the potential for conflict from becoming actual conflict. The difference between Adelaide's situation and Camilla's is that Adelaide had no complicated history with Victoria's mother, no memoir accusations, no decades of public controversy preceding her role as consort, and no heir who had grown up associating her name with the dissolution of his parents' marriage. Camilla enters the equivalent of Adelaide's position carrying all of those things, and depending on a man who carries some of them as personal wounds that have not healed in 30 years. That is the specific, personal weight of Charles's private promise. He is asking William to do something that is not only politically and institutionally complex. He is asking him to do something that is emotionally very hard, to honor a commitment to a woman whose history with his family is not separable from the most painful years of his life, to give her the dignity of a continued role inside an institution that her presence has always complicated for him, to be the kind of king whose personal feelings do not determine his institutional choices, who can be, simultaneously, a man who still carries grief for his mother and a monarch who treats his stepmother with the respect her title requires. That is a significant thing to ask of anyone. It is a particularly significant thing to ask of a man who has been watching his father spend the summer of 2026 opening doors to Harry against his wishes, offering rooms at Buckingham Palace without his endorsement, and conducting secret communications summits with Harry's team without his participation, all, in at least one reported reading, in service of the same underlying mission, demonstrating to Camilla that she is protected. William's fury at the Cloak and Dagger Highgrove meeting is real, by every credible account. His fury at the Buckingham Palace offer is real. His fury at Camilla's reported accusation that he treats his father's reign as a formality is real. And underlying all of it, according to the pattern of reporting across this summer, is the deeper fury of a man who has spent his adult life performing institutional loyalty to a woman he struggles to forgive, and who now finds that performance being used against him by the people who want more of it than he has given. Charles cannot resolve that fury. He can only ask William to contain it long enough for the promise to be given, or create enough institutional momentum behind Camilla's future protection that the promise becomes less necessary because its substance is less easily undone. He is trying to do both at once: the Highgrove meeting, the Buckingham Palace offer, the state visit and the Highland Games and the record approval rating. All of it is Charles saying, to William and to anyone watching, that the institution still belongs to him, that Camilla belongs to the institution, and that what belongs to both of them should not be quietly removed the moment he is no longer there to notice. Whether that effort succeeds is the question that will define the opening years of William's reign. Not the big public questions, the coronation, the state occasions, the balcony appearances, the Commonwealth summits, the small ones. Whether a woman who outlives her husband continues to appear at the engagements that matter to her. Whether the charities she built relationships with continue to receive royal patronage under her name. Whether the house she lived in as queen remains the house she lives in as Queen Dowager. Whether the promise was kept. Charles asked for it. The summer of 2026 is Charles trying to make it harder to refuse. The answer, when it comes, will come quietly, through annual accounts and residence allocations and security arrangements, and the gradually legible shape of how one king treats the woman his father asked him to protect. The palace is watching, so is Camilla, and the man who has not yet answered knows that when the doors finally become his, everything he does with them will be read as the answer he chose not to give in words.